morning. Mr. Anan began his briefing to the Council explaining that he visited Turkish refugee camps on April 10th, where UNHCR has registered more than 25,000 displaced refugee Syrians, 6,000 of whom arrived in just the last 5 days. He was extremely impressed with the Turkish government's work in this regard and expressed concern for the April 9th cross-border incident in which 2 civilians were killed. Mr. Anan noted that UNHCR has registered a total of 43,610 Syrians throughout the region as refugees, with many more still unregistered. Mr. Anan also noted that he traveled to Iran on April 11th. He reported that Iranian officials expressed support for his mission. Mr. Anan noted the letter he received yesterday from the Syrian foreign minister, which stated that the Syrian government would cease all military fighting as of 6 a.m. today, while preserving the right to respond, quote, proportionately to any attacks carried out by armed so-called terrorist groups against civilians, government forces, or public and private property. Mr. Anan also stated that he received assurances that the Syrian National Council and the Free Syrian Army would also comply. Mr. Anan reported to the Council that a, quote, fragile calm appears to be prevailing, unquote. However, there are some, and I'm quoting again, unconfirmed reports of some violence in some cities, unquote. He said that this was not unusual in such situations in the first hours of the first days, as parties were testing each other. He stated that the violence, abductions, and torture must stop. He emphasized that he wants to get eyes and ears on the ground quickly, and that parallel efforts must be made to begin the political process. Mr. Anan confirmed that what has happened today, does not constitute full compliance by the Syrian government, in particular of item 2 of his 6-point plan, as Syrian forces and weapons remain in and around population centers. He emphasized that Syrian troops and armor must return to their barracks immediately. Additionally, Mr. Anan stated that the Syrian government has not yet complied with the other aspects of his 6-point plan. Mr. Anan requested authorization from the Security Council for an advance element of a monitoring mission to go to Syria immediately to liaise with the parties and to begin reporting on the situation on the ground. He also requested the Security Council to express its intention to authorize a full monitoring mission, provided that the violence is not resumed next week, and, among other things, that there is complete freedom of movement, unimpeded access throughout the entire Syrian territory, unobstructed communications, unimpeded access to all Syrians by the advance mission and the monitoring group itself, and security guarantees from all parties without prejudice to freedom of movement. Council members are consulting urgently at present, or will be consulting urgently, on the necessary authorities for the advance element to proceed. I'm happy to take some questions.
Madam President, the ambassador of Syria just said that it's not true that Kofi Annan had informed you, the Council, that there has been no compliance in as far as pulling back the troops to the barracks. He says it is not true. He did not say that. So my question is this a demand of a Security Council still? And do the Syrians have the right to demonstrate and go into these demonstrations, or is this preconditional on entering a dialogue, a political dialogue?
Rahida, there was a lot in there, and I think you kind of asked multiple questions, but let me try to answer, and if you want to restate the question. First of all, as I said, Joint Special Envoy Anan was clear that what the Syrian government has done today, the steps that have been taken, do not constitute full compliance, either with item 2 of his 6-point plan or with the 6-point plan in its entirety. And he stressed in particular that troops and heavy weapons remain in population centers. They need to be pulled back and forces returned with their equipment to barracks. So I hope that gives you one factual element from his briefing this morning, and I can't imagine how the Syrian ambassador, who wasn't in the room, could accurately characterize what was said. Now, the Council's view, and I think you've heard it from a number of Council members, is that the six-point plan in its entirety must be implemented. And that six-point plan, as you know, includes freedom of association and freedom of movement for journalists and for humanitarian actors. Those are critical elements of responding to the urgent situation on the ground, as well as creating the enabling environment in which there can be the critical element, which is a Syrian-led political transition in which the aspirations of the Syrian people are met.
About the April 9th incident on the Turkish border that you began with, Turkey has said that this might call into play Article 5 of NATO, that this is an attack on one is an attack on all. Has the Council received any letter from Turkey, and what does the U.S. think of that? And if you could give, maybe at the end of this, where that we stand on Sudan, on the PRST, and on calling for removal from Hejlig and this bombing in Bentiu. You can do that I'd just like to know what's up with that.
Okay. I am not aware of, maybe my colleagues can correct me, of a Turkish letter, except to initially report the incident. I'm not aware of a letter that specifically mentions Article 5 of NATO unless it's come in and I haven't yet had the opportunity to see it. I'm aware of press reports that Turkish officials, have mentioned that were there to be, sustained violence and attacks on Turkish territory, that they may feel it necessary to invoke Article 5. That was not raised, nor has it been discussed in the Security Council. I would like to stay on Syria. If you'll remind me to come back to Sudan at the end, I'm happy to do that.
What steps will the U.S. now be taking to get observers on the ground in terms of a resolution? Can you talk about what you are working on now?
Well, the Council, we expect, will begin deliberations on a draft resolution, one we hope as early as this afternoon. It is our interest and our shared aim to try to negotiate that text as swiftly as possible. And we will stand ready to bring the Council together to adopt the resolution as soon as it's ready. I hope, but I can't be sure. It really depends on how complex the negotiation turns out to be.
Is there an agreement among the Security Council members to include the withdrawal of the Syrian troops from the population areas? This is the thing that the Syrian authorities did not comply with.
I'm not, what's the question?
The question, whether there is an agreement among the Security Council members to include in the in the draft resolution the withdrawal of the Syrian troops from the population areas.
Well, what I can say is that's a critical element of the six-point plan. It's item 2C of the six-point plan. That has not been completed, much less even really begun. And all council members remain firmly united behind full implementation of the six-point plan. We haven't begun negotiations on a resolution, so I can't tell you with any precision what will end up in the resolution. But as a matter of principle, the Council is very much united behind the six-point plan in its entirety. We want one more on Sudan, on Syria, and then we'll go to Sudan.
Yeah, Madam President. Just a few minutes ago, the Syrian ambassador accused several Arab countries to undermine the six-point plan, and then specifically included the United States.
Among Arab countries?
The Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and even and Turkey. There is no an Arab country, but it specifically mentioned. Turkey I asked him to specify other countries that he included the United States.
In what?
In undermine the six-point plan, Anan's plan, saying that like practically in Istanbul you worked against the plan and apparently you're still working against. Can you respond to that? There is any?
The United States has been very clear and unequivocal in its full support for the six-point plan, as have all members of the Security Council. The Syrian government endorsed the six-point plan last month, committed on April 1st to implement the provisions of 2A, B, and C in its entirety by Tuesday. The only people who have been undermining the plan thus far have been the Syrian government itself. Now, today we saw for the first time in a long time a brief positive step, which we hope will be sustained. If this very fragile initial opening is respected and sustained, and that must include the pullback of Syrian forces from populated areas, the pullback of their heavy weapons and the return to barracks, as Kofi Annan said today, then perhaps we will have the beginning of the six-point plan process that we fully support. But the onus has been and remains on the Syrian government, which for over a year has been brazenly killing its people, to adhere to its obligations. Its track record up until today has been dismal. We hope, but we clearly remain cautious in our assessment that today becomes the start of a new way forward. But I think, frankly, we have a year's worth of evidence that leads us all to enormous skepticism.